single phone call from DeanMartin would shatter one of America's most important political friendships and rewrite the rules of loyalty forever. This isn't just a story about a party invitation. It's a story about the moment when glamour, power, and principle collided in the frozen heart of Washington, D.C., and one man made a choice that would define his legacy far beyond the stage and the silver screen. In the final, glittering weeks of 1960, America stood on a razor's edge, poised for a new decade and a new kind of leader. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, young, charismatic, and brilliant, was the president-elect, a symbol of hope and modernity. His inauguration on January 20, 1961, was being crafted as more than a ceremony. It was to be a coronation of style, a celebration of a vibrant future. But beneath the polished surface of this historic transition, a quiet, profound crisis was unfolding in the shadows. It was a crisis that involved the very men who had helped manufacture Kennedy's dazzling public image, the legendary RatPack. And at the center of this storm stood not the fiery Frank Sinatra, but the seemingly effortless, impossibly cool DeanMartin. The decision he was about to make would do more than ruffle feathers. It would expose the brutal, unspoken price of political power and question the very nature of friendship itself. To understand the magnitude of what was about to happen, we must first understand the unique and potent bond between Kennedy and this band of entertainers. This relationship wasn't merely transactional. It was deeply personal, strategic, and utterly unprecedented in American politics. During the grueling, nail-biting 1960 presidential campaign, Kennedy faced an uphill battle. He was young, he was Catholic, a significant hurdle at the time, and he was running against the experienced, politically savvy Richard Nixon. Kennedy needed something more than policy papers. He needed an aura. He needed to be seen not just as a politician, but as a cultural phenomenon. Enter Frank Sinatra. Sinatra wasn't just a supporter, he was a zealot. He became Kennedy's champion in the world of Hollywood and popular culture, a kingmaker with a microphone. He organized colossal, star-studded fundraising galas that filled campaign coffers. He performed at rallies, his voice lending a soundtrack of cool confidence to the Kennedy message. Most importantly, he enlisted his closest friends, DeanMartin, the effortlessly charismatic crooner, SammyDavisJr, the unparalleled multi-talented performer, Peter Lawford, who had the unique distinction of being married to Kennedy's sister, Patricia, and Joey Bishop, the sharp-witted comedian. Together, they weren't just entertainers, they were Kennedy's unofficial cultural ambassadors, his bridge to a new, youthful post-war America. They lent him an aura of sophisticated glamour that his opponent could never hope to match. When Kennedy narrowly, agonizingly won the election in November 1960, the RatPack didn't just feel like supporters, they felt like architects. They were partners in this seismic victory. The inauguration, therefore, was to be their shared triumph, the glittering payoff for their loyalty. Sinatra, bursting with pride and proprietary energy, threw himself into planning a spectacular pre-inauguration gala for January 19th. It was to be the ultimate celebration, a star-filled extravaganza at the D.C. Armory featuring the likes of Ella Fitzgerald, Nat King Cole, and of course, the full RatPack in all their swinging glory. For Sinatra, this was the pinnacle, the moment where show business and the highest office in the land would merge under his stewardship. But as the invitations were being engraved and the set lists finalized, a cold, harsh wind of political reality blew in from the backrooms of Washington. Kennedy's advisors, the pragmatic men charged with translating victory into governance, delivered a blunt, calculated warning to the new president. There was a problem, they said. A problem that threatened to destabilize his presidency before he even took the oath of office. And that problem had a name, SammyDavisJr. SammyDavisJr was by any measure a generational talent, a brilliant singer, a breathtaking dancer, a gifted comedian, and a consummate entertainer. He was also a black man in a country still deeply scarred by segregation. And just a few months earlier, in November of 1960, he had done something that sent shockwaves through conservative America. He married the beautiful Swedish actress MayBritt, who was white. In 1960, interracial marriage was not only taboo, it was still illegal in over half of the United States. For Sammy and May, their love was met with a torrent of public vitriol. They were deluged with hate mail, subjected to vile threats, and condemned in newspaper editorials. Their union was a lightning rod in the ongoing storm of the civil rights era. To Kennedy's political machine, Sammy Davis Jr. underwent a sudden, brutal transformation. He was no longer the invaluable campaign asset, the beloved entertainer. Overnight, he became a liability. The advisors presented a cold equation. Kennedy's victory had been razor-thin, dependent on carrying several southern states. His entire governing coalition was a fragile balancing act between northern liberals, black voters, and the conservative, segregationist Southern Democrats known as the Dixiecrats. If Sammy Davis Jr., a black man married to a white woman, were to be prominently featured at the inauguration gala or on the official stands, the advisors argued the Dixiecrats would revolt. The press would have a field day, splashing stories about race mixing in the new Camelot. Kennedy's support, they warned, would crater before he even moved into the Oval Office. The decision was made with clinical political efficiency. Sammy would not be formally disinvited. That would create its own scandal. Instead, he would be quietly, pointedly excluded. No invitation would be sent to him. The message was conveyed to Frank Sinatra. Sammy's presence was now problematic. It was a betrayal disguised as pragmatism. Sinatra, to his credit, was initially furious. He argued, he pleaded, he called Kennedy's people and defended his friend. But the pressure from the pinnacle of power was immense, the political arguments relentless. Finally, Frank faced the quintessential Hollywood dilemma, access or integrity. He made his choice. He called Sammy and delivered the news, cloaking the betrayal in the language of inevitability. "I'm sorry, Sam," he likely said, his voice heavy. "This is bigger than us. This is the president." Sammy publicly accepted this with heartbreaking grace. "I understand," he said. "Politics is politics." But privately, the wound was deep and corrosive. He had believed in Kennedy, believed in the cause, and believed the RatPack was a brotherhood that transcended race. Now, he was being told that the color of his skin and the woman he loved made him too controversial, too dangerous, for the president he helped to elect. The other members of the pack were trapped in their own webs of obligation. Peter Lawford, as Kennedy's brother-in-law, was caught in an impossible vice between family loyalty and friendship. His path was clear. If painful, he would attend. Joey Bishop, often the most reserved of the group, accepted the situation without public protest. And then there was DeanMartin received his lavish, embossed invitation in the mail. He looked it over, and his sharp eyes immediately registered the absence. One name was missing. He picked up the phone and called Sammy Davis Jr. "Hey, Pally," he might have begun, his voice deceptively light. "You get your fancy invite yet?" The pause on the other end of the line told him everything. "No, Dean," Sammy replied, the weight of the world in those two words. "They don't want me there." Dean asked the simple, obvious question. "Because of May?" "Yeah," Sammy confirmed. "Because of May, they're worried about what people will say." In that moment, DeanMartin felt a surge of emotion, but it wasn't the explosive, table-pounding rage that was Sinatra's trademark. It was something colder, quieter, and more formidable, a principled fury. This wasn't just rude, it was wrong. He then called Frank Sinatra. The conversation was likely tense, a clash of two fundamentally different worldviews. "Frank," Dean would have said, his tone still calm but edged with steel. "Are you really gonna go through with this? You're really gonna go there without Sammy?" Sinatra, already burdened by his own compromise, would have launched into the same political justifications he'd been fed. The South, the coalition, the presidency, the greater good. Dean listened, but he was unmoved. "I don't care about the South," he interrupted, his voice flat. "I care about Sammy. He's our brother. They're treating him like he's dirt. If he's not invited, I'm not going either." Sinatra, desperate, played his last card, history. "Dean, think about what you're doing. This is history. This is the President of the United States. You'll regret missing this for the rest of your life." And then came DeanMartin's line, delivered not as a shout, but as a simple, unshakable statement of fact, a line that would echo through the decades as a testament to his character. "The only thing I'd regret, Frank," he said, "is going to something where my friend isn't welcome." With that, DeanMartin did the unthinkable. He picked up the phone, called the relevant authorities, and declined an invitation to the inauguration of the President of the United States. In the corridors of Washington power and the gossip columns of Hollywood, the shock was palpable. In an era defined by deference to authority, nobody said no to the president. Nobody chose personal loyalty over a front-row seat to history. But DeanMartin, the man who built a career on appearing not to care, had just drawn a line in the sand with perfect, unwavering clarity. When he called Sammy back to tell him, the emotional dam broke. "Dean, you don't have to do this," Sammy pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "This is the president." And Dean, true to form, deflected the grandeur with simplicity. "You're my friend," he stated. "That matters more." For SammyDavisJr, a man who had spent a lifetime battling for respect and acceptance, this act was a lifeline. Years later, he would reflect, his voice thick with emotion, "Dean didn't have to do that. He could have gone, had a great time, rubbed elbows with the president, but he chose me instead. He chose principle over politics, friendship over power. I will never, ever forget that." Oh, the show went on, but with a glaring, principled absence. On January 19, 1961, Frank Sinatra's star-studded gala proceeded at the D.C. Armory. Ella Fitzgerald's sublime voice filled the hall. Nat King Cole's smooth baritone warmed the crowd. Sinatra himself took the stage, the master of ceremonies. The president-elect was there, beaming, surrounded by the glow of celebrity. But DeanMartin was not. He was over 2,000 miles away, at home in Los Angeles. The next day, under a steel-gray sky and through a driving blizzard, John F. Kennedy stood on the Capitol steps and placed his hand on the Bible. He became the 35th president and delivered one of the most famous speeches in American history. "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Frank Sinatra stood in the frigid crowd, a witness. Peter Lawford stood with family. The political and celebrity elite of the nation huddled together for warmth, part of the historic tableau. But DeanMartin was not there. He was still at home, likely with a drink in hand, watching the grainy black-and-white broadcast on television. And sitting somewhere else, also watching his small screen, was SammyDavisJr, witnessing the oath of the man he'd campaigned for from a painful, exclusionary distance. Yet, because of Dean's choice, he wasn't watching alone. The solidarity was silent, but its message was deafening. The aftermath of this single decision created a rift that never truly healed. Kennedy's Camelot and the RatPack's summit were never the same. The president had revealed the limits of his friendship. Politics would always come first. For DeanMartin, however, his public persona was forever transformed. The image of the laid-back, martini-sipping, carefree crooner was peeled back to reveal a man of profound, unyielding integrity. He proved that his nonchalance was not a lack of conviction, but a conservation of it, a man who knew exactly what was worth caring about and would not compromise when it mattered most. Peter Lawford later conceded that Dean's stand was braver than people ever knew. He was risking the fury of the president, the disappointment of his most powerful friend in Sinatra, and potentially his own career prospects. But Dean operated by a different calculus. The profound historical irony is that Kennedy's advisors were almost certainly wrong. The controversy surrounding Sammy's attendance would have been a temporary firestorm, a 9-day wonder in the press. Kennedy's presidency, tested by the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, would have easily survived it. But in their risk aversion and cold political calculus, they forced a moment of moral clarity. They created a test that only one man passed. Kennedy secured his place in history. Sinatra preserved his access to power, but DeanMartin secured something infinitely more valuable, his own soul. In a world desperately chasing the spotlight, he demonstrated that true strength is sometimes found in stepping out of it. He chose the quiet, dignified power of loyalty over the roaring, empty power of proximity. This story transcends a simple historical anecdote about a missed party. It is a timeless parable about moral accounting. It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question: when the seductive glitter of status, access, and history itself clashes with the quiet, steadfast call of principle and friendship, which voice do we heed? For DeanMartin, the answer was instinctive and absolute. His friendship was a covenant, a bond that no political invitation, no matter how gilded or historically significant, could ever supersede. The final chapter of this story underscores its enduring meaning. Years later, as SammyDavisJr lay dying of throat cancer in 1989, Dean came to visit him. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the ghosts of their glorious past, Sammy, frail and struggling, reached back to that winter of 1961. "Dean," he whispered, "I never thanked you properly for skipping the inauguration." Ever the deflector, Dean waved a hand, brushing it off as if it were nothing. But Sammy, with the clarity of a man facing the end, insisted. "It meant everything," he said. When everyone else saw a problem, you saw your friend, you saw me. At Sammy's funeral in 1990, DeanMartin served as a pallbearer, helping to carry the weight of his brother one final time. When a reporter later asked him if he ever regretted missing one of the seminal moments of the 20th century, Dean's answer was a masterpiece of succinct philosophy, perfectly in character. He didn't speak of history or lost opportunities. He simply said, "I don't regret anything I did for Sammy." So we are left with a defining question. What is the true measure of a man? Is it being in the room where history happens, a face in the crowd of power, or is it being the person whom history remembers for making the right choice when the cameras were off and the price was high? DeanMartin never gave a soaring oration on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. He didn't lead marches or filibuster in the Senate. But with one quiet, deliberate, and profoundly defiant no, he delivered a sermon on human dignity more powerful than any speech. He defined his character not by the illustrious company he kept, but by the friends he refused to abandon. He measured his worth not in the invitations he received, but in the loyalties he honored. In an age obsessed with image, he acted on substance. That is his legacy. If you found this story of quiet courage and unwavering loyalty compelling, if you believe these lessons from the past still resonate today, then do us a favor, hit the like button below. It genuinely helps this channel, Winds of Thought, continue to unearth and share these hidden stories of principle, character, and the choices that truly define us. Thank you for watching and for reflecting on what matters most.